Welcome. It's been a while. I hope this finds you well. There is no specific timeline to this. This is just of the now. I felt compelled to come back to this work, as I will intermittently when the need arises, when I feel that there's something to contribute. I have to say that a lot of the reason why I haven't been more prolific with creating video content is because I personally have gone through a little bit of a rejection of aspects of divination, um, mostly because I started to realize within myself, because of my own anxiety or sense of inertia, that I was relying very heavily on placing my narrative outside of myself, listening to readers who tended to be more predictive in the mundane sense, and that simply is not, it's certainly not what I do. When we meet, and it's not, I understand the purpose of it, and obviously as I've used it myself, I certainly see how valuable it can be when we're in a time of deeper questioning, to have a reinforcement of a discussion around the inner workings and how they manifest externally. But it became very anchoring, and because I do an enormous amount of driving in my life through my job, I have been using those as ways to fill time, and I'm not learning. I am hearing repeating patterns, and it just kind of gets to the point for me where it makes me then doubt other aspects of my spiritual practices, and of course I don't want to do that. And I can't place that blame outside of myself, so please don't misunderstand me. But I had to regroup, because not only have there been a lot of people around me energetically who have been suffering and struggling with a lot of anxiety and strain and confusion, disconnection, and avoidance. Um, but, well, and as I have journeyed through my own experience of a resurgence of um, angst, existential angst, um, understandably amplified by the external world, um, I personally found myself moving more and more into a place of escapism. I still am a little bit in that, but escapism in the sense that I put on rose-tinted glasses, didn't want to really perceive anything of our universe as being challenging, because the challenge had become too much for me. I needed to go into a period of healing. The healing required of me to focus my energy on myself, and then the outside world became more and more complex. Let's just put it that way. And so it awakened a lot of other um, uncomfortable feelings that have been having to process and um, confront and find language for in my own um, energetic flow. And I have sort of come a little bit further into that. Perhaps the fact that Jupiter has literally just turned direct is a part of that, specifically because I have Jupiter in Aries retrograde in my natal chart. So that little retrograde that we had there probably hit kind of, it didn't hit hard. It's just, it's the internal expansion that needed to take place. And so that process happens privately. And I want to remind you, if you've been going through existential angst or anxiety or worry or depression or any form of shadow processing, remember that you're not alone. Remember that these are also energetically driven. Remember that we are all on a journey of discovery. And there are times when we discover in the light, and there are times when we discover in the dark. And we can't be scared of the dark because it is so integral to who we are. The dark doesn't really exist in the present. That's something that I've come more and more to understand. If we give space to it, then by all means it can become extremely consuming, but it's an illusion. The dark is always anchored in the past. The dark is always something that is reflective of the past. And so how we process that is really ultimately going to define how we are affected by our emotional processing of these things. And the reason I'm talking about all this is because the last time we met, we were very deep in the early Scorpionic energy, and so it would make sense too that we would have gone through this existential shedding. I always feel that that's really what Scorpio ends up being, is an opportunity for shedding falsehoods that fog our realities and our ability to progress. So hopefully you are coming out of that if you have been feeling that way. If not, be patient with yourself because it is coming. Sagittarius season is upon us, and I feel it pretty strongly. I felt it shift. I felt that sort of affable kind of external nature of the fire, and that's always what makes these end of year festivities warm up, right? So that's actually where I'm going to start. I'm not really going to talk that much about other astrology because I don't really feel, I don't want to define ourselves too much beyond our season. So let's just read about Sagittarius to remind ourselves of what Sagittarius represents existentially and individually if you happen to have Sagittarius in your chart. The mutable sign of Sagittarius in fire begins its season at the end of autumn as we move into the cold days that usher in winter. The days ahead will take foresight and proper application of all we acquired and stored through the growing season. We must have the vision of what is to come to ensure the appropriate planning and distribution of resources to sustain us through winter. Similarly, Sagittarius is the visionary who shows the way to higher understanding through its storing up of knowledge and courageous and independent exploration of higher truth. Sagittarius has a passion for philosophy, teaching, travel to foreign lands, religion, and belief. And I just want to interject there that, again, when we consider Scorpio and the idea that that is a period of preparation to get us prepared for the winter. It's like the shedding is really shedding of baggage that, is hard to carry when there's a external darkness. We have less sunlight. We have less well, we've just become more insular in many ways. Of course, again, I am biased to speaking of the Northern Hemisphere, so forgive us those of you in the southern hemisphere, I'm not really sure how we would adapt those things. It's not my experience. Um, so um, I've never really come across anybody who spoke very eloquently about how astrology affects people that live in the southern hemisphere based upon, what these different signs represent. So maybe we just have to look at these as being archetypal and not necessarily based on our actual geographic um, and meteorological experiences, right? Mm, where was I? Sagittarius's ruling planet is Jupiter, which endows it with a deep sense of optimism, faith, and a drive for higher perspective and adventure. The mutable fire nature combined with this influence creates a passionate and progressive personality that seeks to understand the world and give that understanding back with greater clarity. This is also where Sagittarius gets its more transient nature and wanderlust. It can be difficult to keep Sagittarius in any one place for so long, as it also, sorry, I honestly have no idea how I botched that. It can be difficult to keep Sagittarius in any one place for too long, as it always feels the call for adventure and expansion of knowledge and experience. Sagittarius is the sign of the hunter, frequently seen as poising his arrow directly at Scorpio in the night sky, perhaps trying to defend Orion. Although some interpretations see Sagittarius as a fiery hunter, the more familiar figure to link with him would be the wounded Chiron. Although the warrior energy is pivotal to this time, with two martial constellations presiding over the skies of November, Sagittarius brings with him the energy of learning and wisdom, which balances things out. While November, and that is again, Sagittarius is the harvest of all that inner work that we do in Scorpio. So there is always something to show, and that's where we have to remind ourselves if we're still in the rut of um, our brain response. It's almost like a bruise, after impact. The brain carries the energy of the shedding and the shedding trauma essentially. But because we relive the trauma in order to shed it, in a lot of ways, that means that we have brain associations. And I think, I mean, obviously, I'm not speaking in scientific terms, but there is this sort of residual effect that we have to take into consideration when we are making progress with our mental and spiritual health, that sometimes there's a little bit of an aftertaste and it takes a little moment to fully emerge from that slightly scary time. Where was I? Although the warrior energy is pivotal at this time, with two martial constellations providing over the skies of November, Sagittarius brings with him the energy of learning and wisdom, which balances things out. I'm just rereading this whole thing. While November is one of the heights of the winter tide, Sagittarius reminds us that this time is not just wild and mindless. Still, there is a familiar pattern to the energies, almost a natural order or design that, once learned, can offer you more depth and knowledge than is present on the surface. The tarot card of Sagittarius is Resurrection, which would be Judgment. After the passage into death through Scorpio, the energy is now reborn and ready to experience life with new awareness, precisely. The transformational processes focus will power. No, the transformational process's focused willpower allows for a much deeper faith and spirituality that can now be applied to the physical world. I find that Scorpio actually brings us to contemplate our own mortality in many ways, which is sort of attached to the idea of obviously death, but to the idea of shedding, because ultimately that's what everything about our life cycle is, right? The cycles are about growth, learning, keeping what is of the wisdom and worth to continue cultivating, getting rid of the husk, the excess, whatever it may be that it happens to be, and going forth more lightly. But being lighter also implies um, perhaps having less of the gravity of life, which in a way poetically makes us closer to the angelic realm, right? As we become lighter, so therefore closer to death. The highest expression of Sagittarius is to bring a higher understanding through an elevated awareness of the self's spiritual nature. In this way, Sagittarius learns to turn the archer's arrow inwards and bring that inner elevation into illumination by integrating faith with knowledge and translating it into information that will serve humanity. And I think that's a very beautiful place to focus our attention as we embrace the beginning of Sagittarius season. We are in the first week of it, so it's pretty new as I record this. But while I don't want to limit the scope of this reading, essentially I see it as a Sagittarius season reading. I'm going to show you what our Sacred Destiny cards were that came out, because they give us a little bit of an idea of where we're at the beginning of this rebirth. We had the Voyage card, literal or metaphysical. This is the idea of again, it's kind of like the Fool, this card, in the sense that it implies the beginning of a new path. With enthusiasm, with a sense of purpose to it. Perhaps we've simplified our life, perhaps our goals are simpler, perhaps we aren't reaching for the stars in quite the way that we once did, but there's something quite beautiful about having a more humble set of goals, right? And then we got that reinforcement with the Simplicity card and the Wisdom card. I don't think that I need to elaborate too much on that, but that is the energy of this Sagittarius season. Second to that, before we get into the tarot, I pulled a Sufi Wisdom Oracle card, something that we haven't done in quite some time. And the card that we got is Live in the Moment. What you are looking for is with you. And how important is that, particularly right now? I mean, I feel part of the reason, again, why I stepped away from recording these readings was because I felt a very strange rapport to time. Of course, we're accustomed to the acceleration of time at this point, but sometimes being less constrained by time ends up awakening a little bit of resistance, because it's so unfamiliar to not feel so slight in our dimensionality, if that makes any sense. Anyway, I'll focus on reading the card's message. Where is it? Live. Where was that page? Oh God. Oh, here it is. Okay. Be drunk, for you know not whence you came nor why. Stay drunk, for you know not why you go, nor where. That is a quote from Omar Khayyam. A soft voice is reminding you that what you are looking for is already within you. It wants you to open your hand and see what you already hold in it. There is no need to wait to see what will happen. All you have ever longed for is here in this moment, right now. Let go of your clever schemes and be the beauty you are. Let joy change you into an expanding universe. Surrender into the marvelous aliveness you feel and let the sun anoint you with its light. Omar Khayyam likens the state of being lost in love to being drunk with feeling beyond time and place. He reminds you to benefit from your own life-giving creative power rather than focusing on past concerns. Living in the moment means utilizing all your senses and staying in the experience of how it feels. By concentrating your attention on the present, you are better able to live each moment as it happens. You will have the opportunity to recharge, renew, and to learn to use your energy to enjoy whatever it is that you are doing in each moment. Dear one, when you are more positive and optimistic in the present, you live and experience your life rather than thinking about it. You will be open to the possibility of a much more positive and promising future. Your relationships will be more satisfying, for these changes can heighten your self-esteem and make you more open to the truth. The message is to live your life to the fullest, to make every moment count, and to do it now. Be more spontaneous. And the mantra of this card is the following. I will not let yesterday crowd out today, and I will not let fear of tomorrow dominate my actions and thoughts. I am determined to live more consciously and fully experience each moment as it comes. A very, very important, simple but important reminder for most of us, but perhaps you are now in a moment where you can just even consider this for the first time in your life, just how resistant you may have been to living in the moment. I think that's kind of what I was meaning about the angst around time and space and the changing attachment that I've felt personally to those constraints. And living in the moment is a paradox because it also implies the infinite. And I think that's really where we as human beings become very confused. And it's a difficult one for us to wrap our heads around because, you know, you can touch yourself and you feel like you're here, right? And you are in a molecular sense, but in many other ways, you're everywhere. And time and space are not even the higher realm way of measuring anything, if anything's measured. So it gets really confusing, right? When you apply that practically in your life. Okay, let's look at our tarot cards. So our underlying energy of the week, we got the Six of Wands in reverse. It did its own little thing where at one point while I was interpreting the cards prior to our reading, it sort of shifted around a little bit. So the implication to me is that the Six of Wands as a card of victory, or in the case of its reverse, a feeling of, again, we don't look to the direct opposite of victory in that interpretation. It's really more about how emotionally we resist real victory, how emotionally we become focused on our defeat. We get focused on our sense of poverty consciousness when we are challenged. And that is, again, a state of mind. It's just about how we choose to view anything that we experience. From a more stoic perspective, if we were looking at Marcus Aurelius, we're like looking at the idea of seeing the good in the universe in all moments, of understanding the value of everything that we receive, to be in the position where we can find the wisdom and the worth, the value in every experience that the universe gives us, whether that causes us to feel like we're losing our minds temporarily, or we get so consumed with anxiety and the existential poverty consciousness. Um, these are blessings because they force us to grow. They force us to think. They force us to move beyond our limitations. Every uncomfortable feeling is the opportunity for us to understand better why we are capable of such feelings. They're not punishments. I know how hard it can feel when you're in that moment and you feel that you are perhaps being punished, or that you're invisible, or that you have opened up, the jaws of life have opened up to swallow you into the dark underbelly of some kind of existence that you had never encountered before. And yet, again, when you bring it back to the present moment, perhaps you have to just drag your heels enough to remember how many times you've been there before and how many times you've come out of it before, because that is growth. Growth is uncomfortable. And when you're feeling insecure, it really is just an indication that you're growing, right? Because you're facing the insecurity. You have the awareness of it. Sometimes subconsciously, it's pushed to the surface to force us into growth if we have not been flowing with the natural flow of the universe. When we've been resisting change, or resisting giving up our routines, our safe little bubbles. We're all entitled to the time to heal and to evolve, but there comes a point when we have to have that faith. We have to find that faith in God, universe, however you want to call it, the light, energy source. You have to have that faith that there's a purpose to everything that you're experiencing, and that you would not be experiencing anything that you're experiencing if you weren't capable of experiencing it with joy, with love, with purpose, with an eye for total acceptance of the value as being divine, right? I mean, we do have tricky cards here indicating that there's a lot of turmoil within us that we are turning around. There's movement here in the Sagittarius season, away from this discomfort. And I say discomfort because what represents us is the Five of Pentacles in this present energy. Again, when you come out of Scorpio season and you have shed so much, shedded. Why do who knows? I guess I can't even speak English anymore. But I hope you can't hear this very annoying background noise, but like a neighbor seems something that sounds like, I guess, like Johnny Cash or something, which is not an unpleasant thing, but it's because his voice was so deep, it's like kind of um resonating in a way that's a little distracting for me, so I apologize. Mm. So I forgot what I was saying now. Five of Pentacles, poverty consciousness. Yes, Scorpio season, this shedding will, of course, leave us feeling that we have less. When we shed baggage, the great irony of that is that we probably feel empty-handed. We feel ill-prepared because we don't have a replacement for that. But that's what fire energy does for us. It reignites the flame. It allows us to move forward into growth. So that Five of Pentacles, poverty consciousness, inability to see the help that is available to us, um, perhaps being really restricted by attachment to a narrative of victimhood, um, and being in the dark, uh, and therefore losing faith, not consciously, but just by process, losing faith that the light is at the end of the tunnel and that we do move through purposefully in order to discover something new and better and more beautiful, because the more at peace we are, no matter how simplified our life has to become in order to gain that peace, the peace within itself is the light. It's hard to imagine that in a world that's as crazy and loud and yeah, like, I mean, we live in a brutal, mm, perpetual alarm of an existence, right? That's it is catastrophic for our collective mental and spiritual health, um, that so many people are in these lulls where they're not able to awaken to their inner power, and that and again, as I say, it's not an absolute. We ebb and flow. I am coming out of this feeling of, I don't know if it was so much self-doubt as it was sort of a bizarre nihilism that took hold, where it just kind of felt like, is any of this worth it? Is any of this even, um, you know, when you get into that place where you have all the spiritual language and you've done all of this work, and then you go through these moments of doubt. It's a crisis of faith where you just feel like, am I, like, the hamster wheel is still turning. It's still a wheel, you know? There's no rapture. There's no sudden, ascension. It's like that's just not. It exists all the time. The elevation is the ascension, the freeing of ourselves to find peace. This is what leads to ascension. We can't remember that a lot of the time because of the noise of this world in which we live. Anyway, I'm going way too into that, but I'm going to explain a little bit why. So, because what crosses us was the Nine of Wands. So, again, when you come out of a shedding cycle, you are going to feel exhausted on some level. It may not be physical, it may be. It may be just mental, it may be emotional. But there's you know, we become very wary and weary when we are in that energy because we're terrified that something else will trigger more darkness, more fear, more um, uh, loss, more doubt, and it's good to be conscientiously cautious, but how about trying a little bit of a song and dance with faith to reach at least um, cautious optimism, right? Um, a little bit of that sprinkled on our lives every day eventually grows into something much brighter. And I think that's what the reminder is here, because what clarified that energy of the combination of the Five of Pentacles and the Nine of Wands was the Five of Wands in reverse. And the Five of Wands in reverse is important because in our past we have the Five of Wands upright. So this process of shedding through the Scorpio season, it may seem as though we are depleted as a result of it. And I know this is a bit repetitive, but it really, in fact, has led us to being able to overcome that. It's just that we have to remember that we're at the very beginning. Our foundation card is the Knight of Pentacles, which is an awareness that slow and steady wins the race. Yes, it is a knight, not a page, but the pentacle suit is still always a slow build. It is truly on the earthly plane the way that we build foundation for ourselves. So the Knight of Pentacles is always steadfast, but slow, intentional, planned. And there may be a need as a result of that practicality to embrace the rigidity of that, discipline. We have to, sometimes when we've gone through a mental health crisis, we have to do our breathing exercises every day. We have to do our gratitude practice every day. We have to remind ourselves that exercise makes us stronger, and it takes us out of our thoughts, and it allows the flow of oxygen. It's all discipline, though, because I know that very often when you're coming out of a dark place, it always feels easier to just find something escapist. So the goal really is to transfer that escapism in our negative habits over to an idea of what may seem like escapism. For me, I could say that the gym is an escapism from reality in a weird way, because I don't have to think. Or sometimes I'm only thinking, but I'm thinking in a way that it can't go overboard because the adrenaline is being used by my body, right? So, if that makes any sense. Our immediate future holds some bright inspiration, which is also very Sagittarian. We have the Magician card, and the Magician card here is speaking to us of how much of the inspiration and the drive really lies within ourselves, and really taking that time through that disciplinarian action to remind ourselves of how we actually hold all of these tools. We are a whole. We are part of the whole, but we are a whole within ourselves. And it's a whole ecosystem that we're dealing with. And when one chakra or one part of our emotional balance is out of balance, we find ourselves feeling disempowered, not remembering that we are in divine alignment with the tools that we possess within. We just have to awaken to them. And in this case, we got the clarification of that with the Ace of Cups, which emphasizes the emotional realm. So our heart chakra, well, really our solar plexus into our heart chakra, because, personally, I can tell you that I get a lot of, I work to move that energy up to my heart chakra, but it gets stuck a lot in my solar plexus because I'm a naturally, maybe naturally isn't the right word, a conditioned anxious person. the flow of that moves into what's crowning this reading in the personal realm for us is this Three of Swords energy. Now, don't freak out. The Three of Swords is there because it's based on the past. The Three of Swords is not a predictor of things to come. Those swords, there aren't swords on this because it's the Surrealist Tarot and it has, for some strange reason, Facebook. Well, I suppose the idea is that we lose ourselves in our egoic struggles and then we end up getting very, we suffer a lot of pain as a result of that. But of course, that's really what this is. In the traditional tarot, the three swords entering the heart, these are thoughts, these are experiences that we have attached thought processes to, that we carry with us, that then cause us to go into impoverishment emotionally, where we find ourselves having an answer for everything based on the past, based on what caused us pain, based on how we're going to protect ourselves. So the Three of Swords in many ways indicates more a restrictive energy into our pain narrative. And of course, we move through the Four of Swords being, our healing process into the Five of Swords, which is then when the ego clashes with the outside world, and then we want to prove ourselves because we know that we can't stay in the pain. So we flail, we kick and scream like infants, Fortunately, as we have more experience, we learn to do that with a little bit more restraint and grace, but it's complicated nonetheless. And that Three of Swords, that pain, that process of letting go of the pain, it was clarified by the Fool in reverse. Now, that's a complicated clarifier to have because the Fool in reverse implies that the journey isn't ripe for external departure, beginning. However, it's not a negative thing. What it implies is that we're still in the inner processing of our emotions. The victory is there. That's why that Six of Wands came out upside down and then sort of shifted itself around a little bit on the table, because that is what this process is. This process is moving from an internal victory where we finally accept that what I am is what I am, where I'm at is where I'm at, my experience of life is what it has been, and I am letting go of the baggage that I analyzed and separated through the Scorpio energy, and that death is to be celebrated because rebirth is to be celebrated. And rebirth comes as a result of death and the cleansing that made room for rebirth, right? So the Fool here in reverse is just literally kind of like a timestamp saying, let's be mindful that we still have a little bit more internal work to do so that we can grow out of our pain narrative. And pain narrative is not just heartbreak or, whatever. It's also swords are the mental. So it's everything that causes us to have anxiety attacks, dark, depressive moments, feelings of isolation and alienation and loneliness. It's all of those things. They're all just narratives. And we know that. We've worked very hard on all of this stuff, but we're human. and we experience things cyclically in order to remind ourselves. Of course, we level up, so it becomes less complicated, less difficult to overcome each time that we complete a cycle as we learn and grow, right? Um, which moves us into how we experience the outside world. And we have this very powerful chariot card in our present, implying that there is movement. There's a lot of, you know, as a result of this processing, we're now coming into a place where divine masculine and feminine can meet. We find ourselves more in balance. There may still be a little bit of a temperance energy there in order to force ourselves to move forward, but divine masculine and feminine within us, you may not necessarily be consciously aware of how those things are shaping you right now. But obviously that's far too complex for us to get into, and I don't want to get into a binary traditionalist kind of discussion about what divine masculine and feminine represent for each one of us. You know it, you figure it out. Personally, I embody both. I think that I am pretty good at embodying my divine masculine and divine feminine, although I will, for comic relief, add that I started taking Tongkat Ali recently, which I cycle on and off of because it's a natural testosterone builder. And as a result of depression and things, I've questioned whether my testosterone levels were lower than they needed to be. And what I have found is, contrary to, we'd love for it to be all the masculine traits that we would consider divine and elevated, but I get a lot of road rage that I have to really be careful with. So yeah, I'm just telling you that because um, it really does make me irritable. Like, not irritable, but it's just like things that I should be more patient with sometimes can just make me like, I just want to respond to them, which is really a very mundane aspect of masculinity that I'd really rather not embody too much of, but I guess that's the price to pay. Um, so that chariot energy, that movement forward, the readiness to move forward, it's like we are literally at like in the process of getting to move this fool the right way up so that we can enjoy that, simple journey towards and embracing more wisdom, right? And of course, reminding ourselves that when we look at a journey ahead of us, we very often project or we look back to the past as a reference point. Remember our message to live in the moment, if that's the way that your mind goes when you think of that. We're just here to have this experience so that we can turn that Six of Wands the right way up, right? To remind ourselves constantly that we are the magician, we are the architect of our own journey, that we have the power within us at all times to tap into our heart energy, to drive us forward into a more beautiful, peaceful, joyful, and light experience of life. But of course, with everything that we've just looked at in the inner realm, the clarifier on that chariot is the Nine of Swords. So this is more worry. The swords are thoughts, our experiences, and how the thoughts have been formed around them are creating this fear of moving forward. And this may not be in a mundane way in your life. This may have nothing to do with, your career decisions, your relationship decisions. This is about how we look at life, which of course will affect those things, but it's a much bigger picture. Well, when I say bigger picture, what I'm really meaning is that it's an energy that's so massive. Think of Jupiter, now direct, Sagittarius ruled, or the other way around, should I say. This is, this enormous energy. So, of course, to be propelled forward by that enormous energy, particularly when we've had a wobble and we're not necessarily feeling completely um, grounded, safe, secure, it's going to cause the potential for those thoughts to go into their loop cycle, telling us that we need to go back to the Age of Swords. We need to treat ourselves like pieces of shit and like start, remembering what those restrictions are. Oh, we've like felt pain before, like we must have gotten burned so that we don't experience those things anymore. No, we just were carrying trauma and didn't know how to embrace the experiences with the maturity and the heart energy that would have allowed us to have a more conscious experience. What happens when relationships or experiences, situations fall apart in our life? It's very often because we live in a dream, and then, it's a dream of our own creation, of our own projections, and we avoid a lot of things. And then one day we can't avoid them, or something just slaps us in the face or just comes right in front of us. And then we have to awaken to it and deal with it. And we realize that it's too uncomfortable for us to acknowledge that there's been this whole journey that we've been lying to ourselves in some shape or form, or at least putting blinders on. And so overwhelming that we don't know how to process it other than by retreating. So we end relationships, um, we walk away from situations that, of course, no matter how good or bad they may be, hold ultimately endless potentiality based on what we put into it. But it really does come down to how we approach it. Even if we have that colleague or that boss or that husband or wife or whatever, who's a fucking pain in the ass and, or like makes us feel bad or doesn't hear us or doesn't make us feel loved, we are choosing to experience that as an aggression, when in fact we need to focus on finding the compassion to understand that that person is also on their own journey, and that their experience is no reflection of you. Their behavior is certainly no reflection on you. It is simply how they are limited to processing their emotions, their spirituality, and their experience. And they are therefore potentially toxic to you, but only if you allow them to get into your system, right? And again, that goes to our personal relationships too, where we have to imbue our relationships with the overflow of the light that we can carry within, which means that we have to get back to that discipline again of making sure that we're carrying as much light as possible, so that we're not triggered to spew whatever and potentially pull out our own swords of our heart and shove them into somebody else, right? It's so hard. I know. It is so hard sometimes to do that. But sometimes we can be really pleasantly surprised, even delighted by how things can turn into a different direction if we just allow ourselves not to judge a book by its cover, not to go by the way that things have been in the past, just to try something different, to lead by example, to know that if we change ourselves, that ultimately it's going to have some kind of an impact on what we're experiencing, and therefore we're going to have a different experience. And if you don't like what you've been experiencing, then trying anything different is worth a shot, right? Um, in our environment, we have the King of Cups. Now, the King of Cups is, again, the implication that there is something outside of us in our environment that is waiting to be embraced. In other words, that there's an abundance of love coming through the wisdom of others, but that we just have to be open to receiving that. And we have to take a moment. Perhaps this whole journey, this whole reading is all about making sure that we understand that we need to take the time to think about that, to truly think about all the places that we feel that we don't receive. Are we really not tapping? Are we really not able to receive them? Or is it just that we are preventing ourselves from tapping into those sources? So we have to reconsider our environment, reconsider the people in our lives, reconsider the experiences that we are having, the relationships that we are um, that have that are built into our lives, and see where we can be more open to receiving a King of Cups. King of Cups, yes, it's a male figure of wisdom in the tarot, but it's the implication here isn't about who or what shape or size or sex the person or the source comes in. It is more the idea that there's a maturity to this love that we can receive, which in turn inspires but also teaches us. But, in order to be taught, we have to be willing to learn, which means letting go of all those swords in our heart, because those really are what prevent us from learning. When you're so tethered to trauma and trauma responses, and you allow yourself to be in a loop of triggering, you are not able to be open to new experience. And that's really what this is all about, is Sagittarius season is opening us up to that potentiality. And there's no coincidence to the fact that Jupiter turned direct. And, you know, um, yeah. Um, Again, here we are, psychologically, our spirit mind, 10 of Wands. We're so caught up, wound up by our um, it's really a form of feeling overburdened, overwhelmed, and not having enough separation from our feelings to properly understand that um, we create our own prison. It really is the prison cell where the door is open or the key is in the lock, and the prisoner can easily let themselves out. But sometimes we become so conditioned to our pain, to our way of thinking, to our perspective of negativity or darkness or ill fortune that that it would be easier and perhaps from familiarity more comfortable to stay tethered to our burdens, to the darker narrative. And we're getting a strong calling here to just toss all that out of wherever, the window, whatever, just the it's just it's gotten to be too much. It's too much. And it's what's causing the loop. It's what's causing this kind of shit. And it's the constant judgment. It's if you need a crutch, you need a crutch. You know, Nobody else is going to celebrate your crutch. But if you're okay with your crutch, that's all that matters. You know? But don't have a crotch and be miserable, because that's a choice. Enjoy it. Enjoy your life. Find joy. Give yourself permission to do things that make you happy. Nobody's stopping you, right? I mean, there's a million voices in our heads that tell us why we shouldn't do this, why we shouldn't do that. Oh, this leads to this. Oh, this happened to me before. Oh, God, enough. This is a reset. And the outcome is the Justice card. So the implication here is a retrieval of balance and a reward for embracing the truth on offer, the nice truth, the light truth, where you don't have to carry all that other stuff. We could be nuked tomorrow. It's true. Or our society can just financially collapse, whatever it is. But we're going to still be alive, and we're still going to have to figure out ways to thrive, no matter whether the challenge is the mundane or the physical or the mental or the spiritual or whatever it may be. They're all just different layers of the same type of thing. So the tools that we have, the magician that we carry within, that magician is there to be able to deal with anything. And, if you burn up in, a nuclear explosion, you won't have to think about it, because you'll just go into stardust and will evolve into whatever lies ahead on this journey, this unknown, unmapped, uncharted journey to the human conscious mind. So the Justice card, I did take clarifiers on that, and these two cards came out to show us what we're overcoming. So we move from that Three of Swords. And how do we move out of that Three of Swords in this Justice evolution? With the King of Swords. Now, what is the King of Swords in this particular reading? The King of Swords is the mastery over our thoughts. It is the mastery of understanding that we create our reality through our thoughts. And our Osho Zen Tarot card to conclude. Rebirth. That's the Ten of Cups, I believe. Let me find the message of rebirth, and I shall leave you be. 136. Okay. I will also add that facing up to me is the Silence card. So again, I think that's a strong strong indication that silence, quiet, is essential. Give yourself quietude to relax into, but also to release your thoughts into, so that you can be in a safe place to experience your thoughts, rather than a place that feels oppressive, right? We have to make friends with our thoughts. This card depicts the evolution of consciousness as it is described by Friedrich Nietzsche in his book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. He speaks of the three levels of camel, lion, and child. The camel is sleepy, dull, self-satisfied. He lives in delusion, thinking he's a mountain peak, but really he is so concerned with others' opinions that he hardly has any energy of his own. Emerging from the camel is the lion. When we realize we've been missing life, We start saying no to the demands of others. We move out of the crowd, alone and proud, roaring our truth. But this is not the end. Finally, the child emerges, neither acquiescent nor rebellious, but innocent and spontaneous, and true to his own being. Whatever the space you're in right now, sleepy and depressed, or roaring and rebellious, be aware that it will evolve into something new if you allow it. It is a time of growth and change. In Zen, you are coming from nowhere and you are going to nowhere. You are just now here, neither coming nor going. Everything passes you by. Your consciousness reflects it, but it does not get identified. When a lion roars in front of a mirror, do you think the mirror roars? Or when the lion is gone and a child comes dancing, the mirror completely forgets about the lion and starts dancing with the child. Do you think the mirror dances with the child? The mirror does nothing, it simply reflects. Your consciousness is only a mirror. Neither do you come nor do you go. Things come and go. You become young, you become old. You are alive, you are dead. All these states are simply reflections in an eternal pool of consciousness. That is food for thought. It's presented in great simplicity, and of course it is very simple, but these are truths that our mind and all those swords have complicated to such a degree that I would imagine we could all use listening to that once again and giving it some deep thought as to what to release and what to just accept and not resist, right? So, on that note, I hope this is helpful to you, and I hope that if you watch this, that everything is well with you. I do this now purely for my pleasure, with no sense of duty. So I hope you receive it with love, and I hope to see you again. In the meantime, have an amazing ride through Sagittarius season, and I will see you when I'm next called to do a reading. Much love. Namaste.